Hello everyone, it is I, the Witch of Paint. This week we will have one of my fastest paintings yet. It literally took me 20 minutes if we ignore the drying time. That's mostly because we are doing something small with no sketch and no inking. For today I will be painting the Cliffs of Moher on a postcard, that is A5. I had considered a sketch but then decided nah, let's just get right into it. I can do this without a sketch easily, because the Cliffs of Moher are just a couple of shapes. They're not overly complicated, so I could just go in, no sketch. So, I took my Winsor Newton landscape watercolours and got right to it. I know, shocker, I'm not using my Van Gogh paints, though I suppose it was about time for a change of palette. I started out by taking my size 12 brush and with ultramarine I painted in the sky. I was being rather loose with my paint strokes and didn't cover the whole sky since it was a cloudy day on the day I took the reference picture for this, as is normal with Irish skies, and I didn't make sure that, they were smooth paint strokes either, because I kind of wanted that rough texture of the paper, which was really fun. Then I took some burnt sienna and began blocking in the cliffs themselves, starting from the middle, outwards, getting bigger with my brush strokes as I went. I added more ultramarine for the sea, leaving a blank gap on the paper to represent the foam of the waves that are crashing into the cliffs. I don't draw seas very often, so this is very simplified. Finally, I mixed sap green and alizarin crimson hue together to make a darker shade of green, which I added across the cliffs to make them a little greener, because there is grass on the cliffs. And that was the basic layer I started off with, so that was layer number 1. For the second layer, I took a mix of presumably burnt sienna and Payne's grey, though I am not sure, since it was left over on the palette from something else. Either way, with that mix, I started to add in the rocky bits of the cliffs, since they are mostly stone, with a few grassy bits here and there. I achieved the kind of look that I wanted with some squiggly motions using my size 6 brush. I wasn't really being particularly precise with my paint yet. I just wanted to get an idea of where things are exactly, so that as I'm moving forward in the painting it all makes sense. Then I got my ultramarine back out and I went over the sea again, since it had mixed with the sap green in layer 1, and because the grass wasn't supposed to go that far into the image, I wanted to bring it back to its proper shape now, so as I'm moving forward it's in the right place. Technically speaking, the sea was also a lot more grey that day, but I wasn't feeling grey, so I made it bright blue. Artistic freedom is a thing after all. I also brightened up the grassy area by adding more sap green over the top of it, essentially using the same loose, kinda back and forth squiggly brush strokes to map everything that needs to be mapped out, and not caring too much about being 100% accurate. After waiting for layer number 2 to dry, which for you took a few mere seconds, I go back in with that dark brown mix from a palette, using it to add shadows and texture to the cliffs. They are made of what, at least to me, looks like sedimentary rock, so layers of rock, to put this very simply. Sorry, geography people. Anyway, on the cliffs closest to us, perspective-wise, I add some of those horizontal lines to give the cliffs that sedimentary rock look. I'll add more lines to the other cliffs as well, but I start out with that one in particular, just adding the horizontal lines to indicate that that's the sort of way that the rocks go. Although admittedly my lines may be a little bit thicker than they actually are in real life, but in real life the Cliffs of Moher are also a lot bigger than a postcard, so allow me these simplifications. With a mix of sap green and alizarin crimson hue, I started adding the shadows of the grassy areas. However, it was looking too brown after I put it down a little bit, so I went back to my palette and I added more sap green into my paint mix so that it was less brown and muddy. And with that, I finally actually got to adding the shadows into the grass, as well as drawing in some of the blades of grass that were sticking out by the sea. To be fair, I should have added these earlier because the sea is now already a pretty dark shade of blue that is not very easy to paint over with, especially with a light shade of a colour. I hadn't thought about that though when I added it in, so now I had to work with it somehow. I also defined the grassy areas on the cliffs a little bit, although I don't go into it in as much detail as I do with the front part of the grass, because it was further away, so it didn't really make sense to put in individual grass blades. Now, switching to a smaller brush, I went back to the cliffs and added some slightly thinner lines to the dark rock of said cliffs. And at this point, I also decided that the sea is too bright of a blue, so I take some Payne's grey and I paint over some of the areas of the sea, just roughly, not really doing too small of lines, just roughly putting in some Payne's grey there. Then I go back to my size 12 brush after this and added more ultramarine to the sky because I thought it was looking a little too bland compared to the rest of the painting, which was kind of bright and colourful, while the sky was looking kind of very white with a little bit of blue. This is followed by, a lot of mixing because I was trying to get a dark green with, again, sap green, a little bit of alizarin crimson hue, and I think I added ultramarine as well. Eventually I'll stop putting alizarin crimson into the mix, but right now it's still in there. I went over the grassy areas again, as most of it had dried up while I had painted the other parts, and I added a lot of darker blades of grass to add some depth to this area for painting and make it look a little more interesting as well. Plus, I like painting grass blades. They're fun and relaxing, even if the motion I do to paint them is just repetitive pulling up of the brush, which I guess is what is so fun and relaxing about this. I know sometimes less detail is better, but I love my grass too much, and I like painting grass blades, as I've said. I also used this to make the grass blades stand out a little more from the sea in the background and rectify the fact that I hadn't thought about them when I darkened up the sea a little. After adding more sap green into the mix because I felt I needed a lighter shade of it again, I paint some lighter grass in between the darker grass, so like kind of in the middle there. And once that is done, I go back into the cliffs again, particularly the one on the very right, and add more defining lines of the rock it is made of, because I started to notice I had misplaced some of the green paint in that part of the cliff, so I attempted to cover that up with the sedimentary lines of the rocks. Apparently, I also changed my mind about the colour of the sea again, because I go back in with ultramarine to add a few wavy lines here and there, to make it look a little like waves, I suppose. I mean, it looks pretty, but I really couldn't make my mind up about the colour of this lol. I think I felt guilty for not sticking to my reference picture as much as I felt I maybe should have. Which is weird, because regardless of how closely I stick to the reference, this is my painting and I can do what I want. I also didn't want to wait for this painting to dry before continuing, so I mixed myself an even darker shade of green using just sap green and ultramarine, and I went back into the grassy area, painting individual grass blades again, even though I literally don't have to. Then, with some very light Payne's grey, I decided to add some cloudy texture to the sky, but only a little, because most of the sky is clouds and there aren't that many shadows up in the sky anyway, so it wouldn't really make sense to me to add those in abundance. By the way, the postcard on which I'm doing this painting is one from Hannah Müller, specifically from the Cartes Postales Aquarelle, which have featured in 2 of my previous postcard testing videos. Although this is not a video for testing or comparing anything, I was just in the mood of painting something fun and small and putting it on a postcard. If you are interested in either of those postcard videos, however, I will have a link to them in the description down below. The paper is 250 grams per meter squared and has a very fun overall texture, which is why I chose this paper for the painting. I did go into this already knowing I was going to make a postcard, but I ended up choosing the Hahnemühle just because of the texture, and I thought it would fit this very well because it has something that's going to make for an interesting painting, essentially. Anyways, once I'm done with layer number 3, I finally allow this painting to dry again, so I could later on come back in for the final touches, which includes defining the grassy areas of the Cliffs of Moher with a lighter mix of the sap green and ultramarine, where sap green is the more kind of dominant colour in the mix. I also add some details to the cliffs that are farthest away using the dark brown mix. For some reason, I also added more grass blades, as if I didn't already have enough on the painting. Well, maybe I didn't. There was a spot on the painting, after all, where I hadn't been able to add them in because it was still wet, but now it's dry, so I can allow myself to add as many grass blades as I want. I also add a lot of green on top of the cliffs, since they tend to be grassy on top as well, so I kind of still had to add that in. There were a few areas where I added some more shadows, particularly around the cliffs, adding some lines here and there, some more detail, everything. After that, I considered the painting done, and because the video isn't sped up as much as it usually is, this ended up being a lot longer of a tape removal than usual. If you're wondering why I have a second layer of tape around the painting, even though it's already being taped down by different tape, well, I have a lot of this yellow tape and I need a use for it, so this is the way I chose to go. Plus, this is way I can be sure that the tape that's actually holding down the paper won't lift up from the board as quickly as it perhaps would if I didn't secure it properly. As you can see though, the paint went underneath the yellow tape, so it wouldn't really be good to use it to tape down the paper itself. Plus, I have a lot of experience of it just straight up ripping the page. Really do need to try the hack of making it less sticky by sticking it to the jeans before taping it to the paper. Gonna have to keep that in mind next time. The whole tape removing also takes this long because I'm wrapping it around my tape creation. I don't know, once upon a time it used to be a ball, but then I kept making new tape balls and then I stuck them to the bigger tape ball and now it kind of looks like a face and I don't want to throw it away. But now the first layer of tape has been removed, so let's move on to the second layer of tape, which is the one that's actually on the paper. Look at that beautiful edge it leaves. I'm very happy with this because sometimes the paint would leak underneath the tape where the corners are, I suppose because it's not completely stuck on the paper in those areas. But this time, no leaks through either the sides of the tape or the corners, which is very good, makes me very happy because it leaves a nice, neat edge, and I love my neat edges. I will get to signing the paper soon once all the tape has been removed, obviously, but that's going to be taking a little bit of time, as you can tell, because the video is a lot closer to real time than it usually is, because usually my paintings just take longer and so I need to speed them up a lot more usually. It's fine though. Anyway, once I am going to sign the paper, which is probably going to be soon, I do a little bit of an oopsie. I wrote August as the month this was painted in at first, and you're going to see me realize this right after I write it down. Like, I wrote it down and then I'm just like, oh no, what am I gonna do? Because I wanted to give this postcard to someone and I didn't want them to think like this has been prepared since August, because it hasn't. It's been painted in September. So I quickly mixed myself up some really dark green and just painted it over the top, hoping it wouldn't stand out in any sort of weird negative way. I mean, in the end, I'll be the only one knowing it, right? In order to make it seem less like I've made a mistake somewhere and covered it up, I spread the dark green paint around a little bit more, just to make sure that it kind of looks like it's supposed to be there. And then I also write September above my signature, because this was painted in September. So, Now that signature is done, so we can move on to the final result together. Let's take a look. This postcard is so pretty. The cliffs are looking as majestic as they always do. I love the blue ocean, even if in the reference it wasn't blue, it was grey, but I like it to be blue, so blue it is. The grass is looking fresh and green, and overall, I am very happy with this painting. It was quick, and you guys basically almost got to follow along in real time as I painted this in just about 20 minutes, although I shortened it down so it's not as long for you guys. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to like, comment something about the sea and ocean, maybe something fun about cliffs down below, perhaps, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. For the time being, I am the Witch of Paint, and I shall see you all next Sunday. Bye! Ooh, look who's made it to the end of this video. Well done. As usual, here are some outtakes as a reward for you making it here. Being a little loose with my paint strokes and not covering the whole sky since it was cloudy day, since it was a cloudy day. Technically speaking, the sea was also a lot more grey that day, but I wasn't feeling grey, so I made it bright. I know sometimes less detail is better. Don't switch to German now. Better. By the way, the postcard on which I am doing the painting